Welcome to you all. My name is Isabel Donnelly. I'm the Dean of School here. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all here to the University of Central Lancashire, and particularly our Preston City campus. I know many of you have travelled from very far away to be here. I'd like to thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules. I hope your journeys have been pleasant. I hear there was a couple of hiccups yesterday with some of the flights, but nevertheless, I hope you have enjoyed getting here. Today is the culmination of 2 years of very hard work on behalf of the university to make sure that we have an institute for Korean studies. And today really is the launch of that institute. What I'm going to do here now is give you an overview of the university, and I've got some slides which hopefully you can see behind my head. And I'll talk to you about the university, what we're about and what we strive for, and a little bit about the school in which Korean studies sits. We are an old institution, which is something that not many people realise. We started back in 1828 as the Institute for the Diffusion of Knowledge. And over those 200 years, we have morphed from institute to polytechnic to a full university in 1992. Our community of staff and students is around 38,000, which is a very large number indeed for a UK university. And we are global in our reach, as is evident by the faces around the table today. We're proud to say that we were the first modern university in the UK to enter the prestigious world rankings in 2010. And our motto since 1828 has been, as is on Latin on the screen behind me, from the earth to the sun. And our ethos is just that. It is to help people achieve excellence from any walk of life and to ultimately develop them into globally competent and aware leaders. We may be one of the biggest universities in the UK, but we are very much focused on a tailored experience for each of our students. And we work with them individually to select from a wide range of options that only such a big institution could offer, so that they can select a tailor-made programme to help them be the successful graduate that they want to be in a way that's meaningful to them as the individual. This approach has won us national awards from things like the Times Higher, and we also have subjects which are ranked in the top 20 nationally, and they range from journalism, creative writing, imaginative writing, and sign linguistics, which is hosted here within our school. And let's not forget that we are also the largest provider of Korean language in the country. There are different categories our government uses to assess research quality. And in the last assessment, we have 11 areas which are ranked as world leading, and 6 more which were internationally excellent. We see research as being a joint venture with our students, in the same way that we see teaching and learning as being a joint venture. And we offer paid research internships for our undergraduates to work alongside leading professors, such as Hazel, and we also offer mentoring. And that's why some of our graduates have already published in academic journals before they even graduate and leave us. The photo on the screen behind me of the small children wearing yellow t-shirts saying Future Scientist is from our annual event, which is to showcase our STEM-based research to our local community. And we also use that as a forum to engage with our local schools and children from a very young age, to raise their aspirations and engage them with the importance of research. What makes UCLan research different is the focus we have on real-world research, and research which makes a difference to individual lives. We've developed new sign languages, we've protected endangered ones. We research into strokes, brain tumours, cancer, the language of cancer, all of these things which sadly touch us in some way. We also believe that with research comes innovation, and we work with businesses closely to make sure that we can help them define success. Our students are innovators, and we are ranked second within the UK for the number of student startups which are still in business 3 years after their launch. And we have recently just been nominated for Entrepreneurial University of the Year. There were very few universities who decades ago realised the importance of operating on a global stage for education. There were very few who at that time did anything about it. But UCLan has been working globally for the past 20, 25 years, and Malcolm may well say something more about that when he talks later. Suffice to say that we are experienced in developing and delivering high-quality transnational education. And we recognise the benefits of that very multifaceted relationship that you need to have with an international collaborator, and the benefits that brings to future generations within our own communities and others that we work with. Of course, we want to make sure that we have a future environment to operate in, which is why we take our green agenda extremely important. We also try to find ways of engaging with our students. We have a Green Week in which we try to encourage students to reduce their carbon footprint. And if you all sit still long enough, you'll notice the lights will go out and the UCLan staff will start to wave their arms to make them come back on. The conference today is organised by the School of Language, Literature and International Studies. And you can see from the strapline behind me that starts with promoting awareness that our mission and our portfolio is very clearly aligned to the UCLan strategies that I've just outlined. We've been engaged in language teaching and intercultural communication for decades, and we have very strong institutional support from previous Vice-Chancellors and current Vice-Chancellors to allow us that privilege of still operating a language department. For those of you that don't work within the UK, humanities is in national decline, but what you will see here at UCLan is that we are in a period of growth. And that growth was consolidated last year when we introduced Korean language, and this year we have opened Italian and Russian for the first time ever. Being an international school, nearly all of us have lived and worked overseas and speak a number of languages. Don't test us on that later. And that diversity within the student body, coupled with the diversity in the staff body, gives a depth and richness which I believe makes the UCLan student experience unique. I've mentioned research before. We have 6 main centres within the school that drive the research agenda. Between them, they're currently juggling £3 million worth of externally awarded grant money, and we generate over £1 million of income annually. Again, this is a tremendous success given the amount of competitiveness there is in the UK for research funds. I mentioned the work that we do with endangered languages. We also work with agencies within the UK on detecting emotions and credibility. And there are numerous applications for that research that go from medical, uniformed services through to human resources. We research into pedagogical areas such as assessment, and we test over 20,000 candidates wishing to prove their level of English language throughout Europe on an annual basis. The research of Hazel and her team needs no further introduction, but what we have done with ICSU is amass a number of researchers from across a number of disciplines who all have a similar focus on Korea. And that stems from linguistics, sport, law, musicology, human rights, etc. And the reason why we are all here, and by the we, I mean everybody in the room, not just the UCLan staff, and that is to teach, learn, research, innovate, and to generate a future generation who is capable of maintaining the legacy that we may leave behind. We're very proud of the external recognition we have from agencies such as the World University Rankings and the Higher Education Academy here within the UK, but we are most proud of what our students say about us. Our satisfaction rates here within the school are exceptionally high, highest in the faculty, and some of our courses have 100% satisfaction, and that is the greatest accolade that any of our teachers and researchers can receive. We think that satisfaction is down to the dedication, professionalism and enthusiasm of all of the staff within the school, and I hope that as you go through the next 2 days, you'll get to experience some of that. I'm going to hand over now to Malcolm. Malcolm McVicker is our previous Group Chief Executive Officer who's going to say a few words.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I should explain that I'm here on behalf of Richard Hecht, who is my successor as Group Chief Executive. He can't be here this morning. He's in the Far East But he dragged me out of retirement to come along and to welcome you to the university and to the institute. I used to be Vice-Chancellor for about 15 years, and then I was Group Chief Executive for a while. And I'm really delighted that the institute is being launched today, because the institute is a further example of UCLan's commitment to international higher education. And I would like to pay a tribute to Isabel and to Hazel for the work they've done, the hard work they've done in establishing this institute. I came here in 1998 from another university on the south coast of England, which already had quite a lot of international work. When I came here, there were early links with China. I think because one of my predecessors had Maoist tendencies, but the university didn't have much other international work. But as a team effort, and it was a team effort, over the years we've developed very strong links, particularly in China and the Far East, India, Sri Lanka, Mauritius, Cyprus. And that's based on a real belief that higher education has to be international. A belief that clearly we're in a global economy. That's absolutely self-evident. But it's also a global society, and a recognition that globalization, economically and socially, is actually increasing. So the pace of international collaboration, international development is increasing, and nation-state boundaries are becoming increasingly irrelevant. And we think very much about the future, about the world which our graduates will go into, recognizing that in the UK, with pension legislation now, the people who graduate this year will still be working when they're 70. And if we look back at the pace of change over the last 20, 30 years, and then think through the pace of change over the next 20, 30, 40 years, it really is increasing, and it's very difficult to predict what that world will be like. But one thing is clear, that it will be very international, and that our graduates, tomorrow's future leaders and future citizens, will be working in an even more global environment than we work in. We also have a strong commitment to universities playing a key role in internationalization. Universities are very important engines of intellectual activity, research, cultural transmission, but they also have commitment to values which we hold dear in terms of civil liberties, inquiry, freedom of individual orientation. And we think universities have a key role to play in this developing international agenda. One of the things that's happened in the UK over the last 20 years, about 20 years ago, a government not blessed with great foresight introduced a national curriculum where languages, international languages, disappeared off the curriculum. There's thus a generation of young people who've never studied even French or German, let alone Chinese or Korean. That omission was recognized a few years ago, about 5 years ago, when languages reappeared on the curriculum. And of course, if you have a generation who've not studied languages at school, then that tends to have an impact on applicants to higher education. So in the UK, we've seen admissions for modern language programs fall significantly, and many universities have responded by closing language programs and sometimes closing whole departments. We resisted that. We had a very strong belief that although everyone might not leave here with high levels of language skills, they ought to have the opportunity to learn a modern foreign language free of charge. And so we resisted the sort of crude business pressures which said, if it doesn't have enough customers, close it down. We rejected that. And we believe very strongly that we should provide a wide range of language education, ab initio right the way through to more advanced studies, to any student who wanted to study a language, free of charge, on a flexible basis. And that commitment for the whole university, and it did require cross-subsidization, I think is paying dividends now, because you now have a languages department here which is broadly based, which is successful, and which has survived when many others have failed. So that's important. The university also has ambitions some people think international work is easy and glamorous, but actually it's also quite challenging. Maintaining our relationships in China, where we have about 10 to 12 really good partnerships established over many years, takes a great deal of effort. I'm very pleased my colleague Tim is here this morning, because Tim spends most of his time on a plane maintaining those relationships. But we also took a decision a couple of years ago that we wanted to have a small number of international campuses of our own. I have to say, if I'd known how difficult and challenging that was, I would have left it to Richard. But I'm pleased to say that we do have our first campus in Cyprus, which is open. And people say, that's a small island, why have we got a campus there? But it's actually brilliantly placed for the Middle East and for Eastern Europe. And I'm delighted to say, after a process which is has been tortuous, we've got decent enrollment numbers this September, which we're really pleased about. We also do have a new school launched on a joint basis in Hebei in China. That opened this September. And we're looking at developing a campus in Mauritius, which is recruiting as we speak, and also in Sri Lanka. And the objective here is that we can say to British students, you can study a UCLan course, you can do a year in Preston, a year in Cyprus, a year in Sri Lanka, or a year in Hebei. You can do some work experience, you can do some language programs. And at the end of that, you've got a highly culturally diverse, proficient young graduate who's got international experience. And I think that offers a gold standard for the future of higher education, which we're really committed to. It's not about bringing money into the university. It's not about trying to reduce our dependency on the British government, though that would be an objective which I would warmly welcome. It's about providing young people with an opportunity to really develop their international skills. And finally, these are, of course, challenging times. I've just come back from Hong Kong. And whilst I was there, a member of the Chinese government said that what was going on in Hong Kong was private and was an internal matter for China. I have to say, I don't think she could be more wrong. And although the Chinese have a news blackout on what's going on in Hong Kong, I was stuck at the airport for some time with some people travelling from mainland China, where they had news programs. And there was a great deal of interest in the movement in Hong Kong and what's going on there from people who are normally denied access to that. And when people say, let's just concentrate on the UK, or let's not worry about international agenda, I mean, there's so many things going on in terms of what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in air pollution in China doesn't stay in China, environmental destruction in Indonesia doesn't stay in Indonesia. But these are challenging times. And those of you who keep awareness on British politics will realise that there's a strong political movement in the UK at the moment, led by a party called UKIP, the UK Independence Party, which would like to withdraw from Europe, and I think in many ways would like to erect barriers so that we could become a sort of modern 1980s Albania. And you can understand that. These challenging times, a natural reaction is for people to look inwards and to seek to erect barriers and thus try to escape from the realities of a challenging world. But that really is crazy. And we have to resist that, because the way we meet today's challenges is not by going into ourselves and closing the door, it's actually by embracing internationalization and working with our colleagues across the world. So I think the launch of this institute I'm delighted with. It's a further strength for the university's international agenda. It brings together scholars from across the world, which is a remarkable academic activity. But the most important thing is it helps us with our agenda of helping tomorrow's graduates appreciate that they work and live in an international world and being successful in that world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. I'm going to hand over now to Hazel, who's going to say a few words and tell us what she'd like us to do next. Yes, we're going to play musical chairs. Could I ask you, while we just make those movements, can I ask you to turn your cards around so we can see each other's names, now that you all know where it is that you need to sit? That would be quite useful. Thank you very much.
And now it's really my pleasure. I met a lot of you last night to welcome you all here to UCLan. I'm very, very proud to be introducing this conference with Isabel and with Malcolm, and I'm very proud to be representing UCLan in terms of the development of the Korean Studies Institute. I know many of you, and many of you had a chance to talk to each other last night. You've come in from Russia, from China, from United States. We've got Danielle's come from Australia for the conference. Where's Danielle? Danielle from Australia, from all over Europe, and we are, and of course South Korea. We're absolutely thrilled that you all took the trouble. All of you are eminent people, and you're all busy, and so we know what it means to get on a plane, especially these days, and come through airports and take the trouble to come over here. We know what that means. We know it's a significant investment of your time, and so we very much appreciate it. We also appreciate the time of everybody who's come from the UK, my esteemed colleagues from the Foreign Office and everybody else. Again, it's an investment of your time. Of course, most things in this country are geared around London, so we're also appreciative that you've come north, which is probably a first for many people. So very much appreciated and truly appreciated. And again, if we can help make things more comfortable, please let us know. I want to say also, going on to the subject matter of what we're doing here, that I believe that around this table we have an unparalleled, it's not just as I've helped or organised it, an unparalleled level of expertise that anyone, anywhere in the world, apart from perhaps in South Korea, would be very proud and happy to find. And even in South Korea, because it's sometimes sensitive to talk about inter-Korean relations, it still will be difficult. So I think that we have a huge opportunity here as academics, as policy analysts, as journalists, and as people involved in think tanks who are concerned with Korean security in the broadest manner, anything from nuclear weapons to food security, to both exchange ideas based on the papers which everybody's done and which you've all read, of course, before we came here, and also in terms of the opportunities we have to have synergies between these different groups of people here. Many academics, particularly in the UK, complain, well, we do the research, but nobody listens to us. Well, now you've got some of the senior journalists in the world that are concerned and write about North Korea. You've got Tanya, where's Tanya, from The Guardian, and you've got Jean, who's not actually in the room now, but she's from the Associated Press Bureau, and Chad, where's Chad? And Chad from MK News with the internet. So there is a real opportunity to have these relationships there. And of course, then we have our people who are representing the diplomatic world. We've got my colleague Richard Morris from the UK Foreign Office. We've got Fabio from the European Council, come from Brussels. We've got people from the US Embassy here, and I'm sure, and also the people from China and the United States and Russia and South Korea. I'm getting my countries all mixed up. Who, unlike in Britain, academics who go in and out of the policy arena in terms of working with and for governments, a different tradition in China and the United States than, say, in the UK, where it doesn't happen that much. So I think we have a magnificent opportunity here. We've got a huge level of expertise. Many people around this table have been working on Korea for 20 or 30 years or more. Many people around this table have lived and worked in the DPRK for many, many years. And many others have visited DPRK for many, many years on and off in a very serious engagement with the broader society in the DPRK and also with the government from many different countries. So as I say, I think we have a wonderful opportunity to have this interrelationship between these different sectors of thought on the DPRK, and to go back to the central question of this conference, which is why is the Korean conflict so intractable? At the end of the Cold War, I mean, I will remember, and many around this table remember, that which was a long time ago now, when every country seemed to be transiting in some way, even China, to market socialism, even China to sort of communist leadership, but still transiting to a different sort of way of thinking and being in the international world. Why is it that the DPRK has remained politically in the position it is? Why is it that the Korean conflict, in terms of what many people call the last of the Cold War conflicts, has remained so difficult to resolve? And I think we have the opportunity around this table to be discussing that in a very substantive way. And one of the other things I would say is that we have the opportunity to do that, even though, of course, there's always interesting day-to-day developments in terms of inter-Korean security relations in the broadest sense, without just thinking about current affairs. We have the opportunity to historicise that conflict and also to think comparatively because of the various people we have around this table. So although it's always tempting for all of us to look at the events of the day, what's happening to Kim Jong-un, etc., I think really for us as analysts from all the different sectors, from journalists, from diplomacy, from academics, we really have a wonderful opportunity which is not available to many. This is our privilege, I think, as analysts, to be able to think in a much more contextualised manner about what's been happening and how that relates to the policy problems of today. So I thank you very, very much, and I know all your papers have addressed this core and central issue. I'm going to move on to introduce our speakers for the rest of the plenary for this morning, which will finish at 11. But one more piece of short logistics come substantive information. You've been all sent papers and they've all been circulated. I have written a couple of times to all of you to say, when you present, please could you manage to stay within 10 minutes. I've also written to our chairs and asked them to be firm but fair and to cut you off in your prime should you be going on. This is a bit ruthless, but it does mean to say that with all the expertise in this room, we have the chance to have a real exchange. And my experience of conferences is that's usually what's appreciated, is that there is a chance, especially in this format. We've got a lot of people, but we're still small enough to be able to have a proper exchange. And that's the purpose. We capped the numbers. We had a lot of people that were asking to come. We just couldn't fit them in the room after a while. So that's the purpose. So nobody's being rude. We're not being impolite. We're just asking you, please stay to the 10 minutes and then we can have the maximum exchange. Because we do have other opportunities. We'll have the dinner tonight. We'll have the event tomorrow for those that are flying back the next day and that are staying. So thank you for your patience and understanding in our 10-minute rule when we get to the sessions. And now I'm going to move on. We've got our next speaker is Mr. Richard Morris, who's the head of the Pacific Division in the Foreign Office. Now, I feel very bad about this because I said to Richard many months ago, would you like to come to this conference? We've got all these interesting people there, and you might find it interesting. But a bit nearer the time, I said, you won't mind saying a few words, will you, at the beginning, by the time he was locked in. So I do feel a little bit guilty about that, but I'm going to forget that guilt and pass you over to Richard.
Well, Hazel, you don't have to feel too guilty, because I am delighted to be here for this conference, to be in such a distinguished company and to see the official launch of the International Institute of Korean Studies here at UCLan. I did want to say real congratulations to Professor Smith, to Hazel, and to her colleagues and collaborators, in particular Professor Kim and Yonsei University, for bringing together this room of such interesting people and such prestigious experts from around the world. Like others, I'm particularly grateful that Ambassador Gregg's joining us, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing from his many years of experience in addressing the key issue of this conference, the security challenge of the Korean Peninsula. Now, participation in this event does feel truly global, but the fact that we're gathered together in the UK with a programme and cast list shaped by UK ROK Prism, I think may give us an opportunity to look at the issue of Korean security through a different lens. Now, before talking about the UK's policies towards North Korea and the role we try to play in international efforts to address security in the Korean Peninsula, I want to acknowledge say a few words to acknowledge the significant commitment that UCLan has made to Korean studies, and then to say a little about UK-ROK relations. Now, I'm conscious that UCLan is one of only 3 universities in the UK to teach Korean at undergraduate level, and I know we're exploring a pilot programme to introduce Korean in local schools, which I think would be a first for the UK. UCLan places a strong emphasis on links with Korean business, and I believe that they have the only official university partnership with Samsung, for example, within the UK. The investment that UCLan has put into establishing the International Institute of Korean Studies demonstrates their conviction that the ROK will be an increasingly important partner for the UK in the years ahead. And they clearly believe, you clearly believe, that offering Korean studies and Korean language courses will attract students to the university. And as head of the department within the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office responsible for our relations with South Korea, I applaud this. So, a few words about UK and ROK relations. Now, last November, President Park made a state visit to Britain. The UK-ROK joint statement released on that occasion recognised the broad and creative partnership for peace and prosperity that exists between our countries. This relationship has developed over more than 130 years since we first established bilateral relations in 1883, but it's grown particularly in both depth and breadth in recent years, reflecting a broader UK shift of focus to the east. On the prosperity side, UK exports to the ROK have grown by 30% year on year since the EU-Korea Free Trade Agreement came into force in 2011. We're well on the way to achieving the mutual goal of doubling bilateral trade by 2020 that was agreed during the state visit. Bilateral investments also flourishing, and a good example is Samsung C&T's 33.3% stake in the Merseylink consortium that's building and will operate the £600 million Mersey Gateway toll bridge. We're also increasingly working together in third country markets, with UK companies providing niche expertise in ROK supply chains for major energy projects in the Middle East. We're also working increasingly closely in support of global peace and security. The ROK's current term on the UN Security Council has created habits of consultation and cooperation that will continue beyond the end of their tenure this December. And there are also more specific examples of us working more closely together overseas, such as the South Korean naval vessel Mummy the Great, bringing 47 British people out of Libya earlier this year. We share a common assessment of climate change as both a global challenge and an economic opportunity, and have committed to work together to lead the global transition to a low-carbon economy. There's also increasing collaboration between our universities and academic institutions. UCLan may be leading the way, but elsewhere there are joint research initiatives in areas such as plastic electronics, fuel cells technologies, and Alzheimer's research. I won't say more about it now, but I hope this gives you a sense of the extent and dynamism of the UK-ROK relationship. Now, of course, the UK's relationship with the DPRK is very different. Having fought alongside South Korean and other troops under UN command during the Korean War, we didn't establish diplomatic relations with the DPRK until December 2000. When we did so, it was not in any way a sign of approval of the DPRK regime, but it did give us a way of engaging with North Korea to express our concerns about issues where we do not agree. Our foreign policy priorities for the DPRK focus on two areas: counter-proliferation and human rights. We use our policy of critical engagement directly to communicate issues of substantial concern and to expose North Koreans to international values and the benefits of engaging with the international community. We've continued to play an active role in international efforts to address these issues. As this audience will know, we're not a member of the six-party talks aimed at achieving DPRK denuclearization. But through our membership of the G8, the EU, and the UN Security Council, we help to shape international action. This includes supporting UN Security Council resolutions in response to DPRK provocations, ensuring robust statements on the DPRK covering both security and human rights concerns in the G8 and elsewhere, improving implementation of sanctions against the DPRK through a combination of awareness-raising workshops and targeted lobbying, and working with EU partners to ensure the DPRK resolution at this March's UN Human Rights Council adequately reflected the appalling findings of the Commission of Inquiry, and that this autumn's UNGA Third Committee resolution will do the same. Separately, through our permanent presence in Pyongyang, we can also share information and insights with partners who have more direct influence. This was useful in April 2013 when we could contrast heightened DPRK rhetoric and threats against the safety of embassies with the calmer situation on the ground. Or more recently, when we could contrast speculation in the international media about Kim Jong-un's whereabouts with what was happening on the ground. Our embassy in Pyongyang and the DPRK embassy in London also allow us to maintain channels of direct communication through which we can express our substantial concerns about the DPRK's nuclear policies and human rights violations. Through activities and projects, we also aim to open a window to the world for people in North Korea to learn more about international values and the benefits of engaging with the international community. Of course, the UK is not the only country to pursue this policy of critical engagement. A similar approach is taken by the other 6 EU countries with embassies in Pyongyang and by the EU as a whole. But there are a number of areas in which we've been able to make a particular contribution. North Korean eagerness to learn English mean we run a successful British Council English language teacher training programme. Through this, hundreds of North Koreans have had their first direct exposure to a Western foreigner. Our English language teacher trainers have introduced students not only to the vocabulary of international economics and law, but in many cases to the concepts that lie behind the words. The majority of those we train come from provincial centres outside Pyongyang and return to the provinces as teachers. We also increasingly meet interlocutors at the DPRK MFA and elsewhere who speak with great enthusiasm about their experiences of learning English with the British Council. Separately, we run a project bringing DPRK mid-ranking officials to the UK to see how our institutions function. These sorts of engagement projects are about finding concrete ways to influence future decision makers, so in the long term, they recognise the benefits of working with, not against, the outside world. We've also been active in engaging the DPRK directly on security issues. Earlier this year, we accredited our defence attaché in Beijing as non-resident defence attaché to the DPRK. This gives us a further channel to communicate our concerns, particularly about the DPRK's nuclear and ballistic missile programmes. It also exposes the DPRK forces to a very different military perspective on international affairs. Alongside this official channel, the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, has built up good working relationships with the Korean People's Army and with key think tanks associated with the KWP and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the International Affairs Institute, and the Institute of Disarmament and Peace. Separately, we've always insisted on engaging the DPRK on human rights issues, despite claims from many that this is impossible. Of course, discussions on human rights with DPRK officials are seldom productive, but as in other areas, we believe it's important to maintain clear, consistent messaging that puts our concerns about violations in the DPRK in the context of our global approach to human rights. We've had some small successes. We have a focus on disability rights that's included arranging for and supporting the first ever DPRK Paralympian to attend London 2012. This year, we're funding a freedom of expression project that's introducing North Korean journalists to modern internet and multimedia journalism skills, and a very different approach to the role of the media. I hope this gives you a flavour of the various projects we're running as part of our policy of critical engagement. So, I hope this has given you an understanding of our relationship with ROK and DPRK and the policies we're pursuing. However, I certainly don't believe that we've got all the answers. I'm a firm believer in open policy making, where we engage with those outside our foreign ministry who've got alternative ideas, and if necessary, try to make our policy even better. On such an issue as security on the Korean Peninsula, this is particularly important. My colleague Philip Martin, who will be able to be here throughout, which I'm afraid I won't, but I also look forward to participating today and hearing from other speakers and continuing our relationship with UCLan. Thank you again to Hazel for the invitation to participate, and congratulations to her and the UCLan team for this event. Thank you all very much for listening.
I'm absolutely delighted to introduce you to our next speaker. We've worked very hard in both in the language side, where we have 3 formal relationships with Korean universities, with Ewha University, Hanguk University of Foreign Studies, and Kyunghee University, and we are negotiating other relationships. So our students, when they do the language courses, can have a year in Korea, and we've already had students from Ewha coming over here to spend a year in Preston, which is probably a bit of a culture shock after Seoul. So that's the institutional side. But I have, as many of you know, been working with colleagues in South Korea and also in North Korea, actually in South Korea, but for some time, and none better than, well, no, of course, in the parity of equals. But I have to say that Professor Kim Yong-ho, who is going to speak next, has been incredibly supportive and helpful to us in terms of helping getting this conference and the institute going, and very kindly helped me when I was in Seoul earlier this year. And some things I simply couldn't have done without him, and we're absolutely delighted that he could be here today. Again, it's a long journey, and we're really, really grateful. Many of you will know Professor Kim Yong-ho. He need no introduction, but he runs the North Korean Studies Institute in Yonsei University. And if you haven't read his book on security, Korean security, then you ought to. And we'll be speaking now, but we're also speaking in the event tomorrow, because his current research is on the media and security regarding Korea and inter-Korean relations. So we're absolutely delighted that he's here, and we hope that it does mark the start of or the continuation of a very fruitful relationship with Professor Kim's institute and with the university as a whole. So I want to pass you over to Professor Kim, and thank you very much, Professor Kim, for being here.
Thank you for your wonderful introduction. And I want to extend my warm appreciation for Dean Donnelly and Dr. McVicker and Professor Smith and her staff who organized this wonderful conference and invite me. And it's my great honor to have an opportunity to speak in front of these wonderful scholars and the Honorable Donald Gregg, the former ambassador of the United States to Korea. And I was really pleased to see the launch of the International Institute for Korean Studies at UCLan, and to see the heavy emphasis on languages and cultures, Korean language and cultures. To recollect my graduate studies back in Columbia University in New York City, I saw many my colleagues who specialized in Japan and China, who devoted a large portion of their time to learn the languages. 8 semesters of languages, 1 hour a day, 5 days a week, 8 semesters, that means 4 years of language training on Japanese or Chinese languages. And after that, they spend another 3 or 4 years for a field trip where they experience the practical, and as well as theoretical aspect of Japan and China. And also, they learn about Japan and China's culture. And then they declare themselves as specialists in Japanese or Chinese politics or foreign policy. During the past several decades, I learned a lot from excellent works written by Western scholars. I really appreciate them, but I was disappointed to see very limited number of Western scholars seem to think that because I'm Japanese specialist, so I can deal with Korean affairs as a bonus because the similarity of culture. Because I major in China, so I can deal with Korea because Chinese cultural influence in Korea is such an enormous impact. That's very limited number of scholars, but what I want from scholarly works in Korea is rigor and richness. And from the perspective of richness, I want these Western scholars spend the same amount of time when they devoted to learn about Japanese or Chinese language, to learn about Korean languages, and to learn about Korean culture, and declare themselves as, Korean specialist. We South Korean universities and governments invite lots of Western scholars to ask them to stimulate interest on Korean studies to their students, and it worked a lot. So we do have many Western Caucasian students in my campuses who learn about Korean languages and Korean cultures. On this, the UCLan's International Institute of Korean Studies will play a larger role, and I expect more cooperation with this institute. And in terms of rigor, the study of Korean Peninsula in security terms invites lots of scholarly interest because it attracts many scholarly works who analyze Korean Peninsula's security problem in terms of international relations theories. In terms of realism, many game theoretic applications on the inter-Korean relations on the zero-sum basis, or game theoretic analysis. And also many analyses worked on the Kim Dae-jung's sunshine policy on the aspect of liberalist theory based on democratic peace or commercial peace. And also, it is amusing to see some element of works analyze Korean issue in terms of constructivist ideas. Well, I read many articles which analyzed the NATO enlargement in terms of constructivist ideas. But as you see on six-party talks, the Korean issue in terms of constructivist ideas is very intriguing questions. Well, just imagine the six-party talks is not between state affairs. Just imagine that it is a project of commercial project run by Samsung or LG. Then it should be have to be killed long time ago. It didn't generate any progress. It is designed to deal with North Korean nuclear issues, and it witnessed numerous North Korean nuclear tests. And it did nothing about North Korean declaration of own nuclearization. But still, we have no choice but to depend on six-party talks. But look at the six-party talks. If I borrow the classification of Samuel Huntington, six-party talks is composed of four different civilizations. Chinese civilizations, Japanese civilizations, we do have Slavic civilizations, we do have Western civilizations. And to construct a common identity out of four different civilizations is a very intriguing questions in terms of international relations. Also, the Korean studies, Korean security studies is very interesting in terms of the study emphasizing on the influence of domestic politics into foreign policy making, both in North Korea and South Korea. In North Korea, Kim Jong-un's top prioritized item is not about territorial integrity or national survival of North Korea as the state, but it gives top priority on to maintaining the Kim family's political survival. And it generates enormous emphasis, enormous influence in making its foreign policies. Several years ago, they gathered about some 15 Korean specialists in Washington, D.C., who had in-depth debate on how to solve the North Korean nuclear issues. After 3 days, I asked the participant that, are there any experts who really think that North Korea would abandon nuclear weapons? None raised their hands. But still, we have to deal with North Korean nuclear issues. But because North Korean nuclear issue is such a core element in maintaining the Kim family's regime, so it holds the nuclear issues to the end. So we have to give some incentives or some threats that because you have nuclear weapons, you're gonna lose your power, or there are a lot more attractive incentives than nuclear program to maintain your regime. Also in South Korea, to satisfy the South Korean public and launching in its North Korea policy is almost seemingly impossible, because we do have Cold War still vivid in South Korea, but in the global sense, post-Cold War culture prevails. So in South Korean citizens live in physically the Cold War era, and also in the mentally we do live in post-Cold War era. So it has very intriguing situation, because the emergence of social media in South Korea And also we do have influence of animals information coming to our mind. So the amount of information increased, but what is astonishing is also the level of our screening process is also heightened. So people do not accept that many information, only they want to receive. So the young generation in South Korea do not, trust in government policies. So we do have a lot of complicated issues how to, make possible the the consensus on North Korean policies. So it attracts many academic interest. So I do hope that the launch of the International Institute of Korean Studies in UCLan will invite many academic works and generate many produce many meaningful works on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kem. We really appreciate that. And I think it's very salutary for us to be reminded of the core issue that we're all going to be addressing over the next 2 days, which is this very intractable issue. And, of course, no more so than to anybody who lives in South Korea, who faces this every single day. And I thought this was a very interesting way of thinking about this discussion, this divergence between the post-Cold War, almost generational thinking, and the issue of the post-Cold War and the Cold War conflicts. Thank you very much for that. And before I pass you over to Ambassador Greg, who will be talking to us, I'd just like to apologise, I should have said this earlier. We're going to try to operate by Chatham House rules, which is, as many of you know, in a nutshell, please don't quote anybody who says anything around the table unless you ask for their permission. Of course, we can't enforce this or police it. We just ask him for your goodwill in doing this. So if you could, if you find anything interesting and you want to use it in your written work, either as an analyst, or a policy analyst, or an academic, or a journalist, please, if you could ask the person themselves if they could be quoted. That's what we would ask for you. That enables us to have a bit of free discussion. So thank you for that. I should have mentioned that earlier. And we're not going to film, just for those of you who are worried about this, any of the Q&As. And we're going to stop filming after our last speaker in the plenary. So you won't have to worry about what you're looking like on telly from now on. Although we may be taking some still photos throughout the 2 days. So I'm going to pass you over to somebody who many of you will be familiar with, if not personally, will be aware of his long-standing work on Korean issues, both in the United States and in Korea itself, and continuing work on Korea. It's absolutely my privilege to introduce our next speaker, who probably knows more about Korea than perhaps all of us put together, certainly me put together. And I'm absolutely delighted that Don's made the trip over to Preston, and we're just delighted to have him here. So I'm going to pass you over to Ambassador Greg.
Thank you very much, Hazel. I'm delighted to be here, and I am highly impressed by everything I have seen and heard since arriving. The people, the facilities, the philosophy are most impressive, and I am really happy to be part of this gathering, which I think is really quite extraordinary. As I look around the table, I see a number of people who could give a better opening speech than I can, and I am very much aware of that. But I will do the best I can to sort of trace my involvement and some of the implications that I have drawn from my involvement. And I will say in advance that I can be quoted by anybody on anything that I say in this talk, because I've been going to Korea and North Korea for many years, and what I've had to say has had very little impact. So it's perfectly okay to. The last speech I made was at the College of the Atlantic up in Bar Harbor, Maine, which is a wonderful college, sort of opening up the ideological and ecological issues of the sea. And there was a PhD there, a wonderful woman from Taiwan who was interested in education in the broadest sense. And she asked me a very interesting question afterwards. She said, if you could give high school students one attribute, what would it be? And I think that's a very interesting question. And I thought about it, and I said, I guess I would say the ability to be vicarious. And I think everything I have heard you say here is absolutely steeped in that. An effort to create in your students an awareness of what it is like to be someone else, and to be aware of their concerns and their high points and their low points. And I think that is extremely important to do, and I'm very impressed by your dedication to that kind of thinking here at UCLan. My first contact with North Korea came in early 1968 with the seizing of the USS Pueblo. I was chief of operations for CIA in Japan at that time, and I was made part of a crisis reaction group to figure out what we were going to do after the ship was seized on the high sea. And we met with the Army, Navy, Air Force, everybody, and we decided, and I think wisely, not to try to retaliate militarily. We felt that that would probably get the crew killed and had a real chance of starting larger hostilities on the Korean Peninsula. So we grudgingly held our fire. The crew was roughly handled, but were released about 11 months later. That stimulated an interest on my part in going to Korea. I had been in Japan for 9 years at that point. And so I paid my first visit to Seoul later in 1968 and was tremendously impressed by the Koreans, by Korea. And so for the only time in my career, I asked for a certain assignment. And so when I finished a long term in wartime Vietnam, where I was involved in running paramilitary operations, I went to Seoul as chief of station. And the first thing that happened there was the kidnapping of Kim Dae-jung by the Korean CIA. And we were able to keep him alive, just barely. I was also there when Madame Park Geun-hye's mother was assassinated by a North Korean assassin out of Japan who fired at the president, but missed the president and killed Madame President. I was also, when I was there as chief of station, the North Koreans were discovered digging tunnels under the DMZ. And the atmosphere in Seoul was very frigid. The golf courses had, at night, tall poles put down in the middle of the fairways to keep AN-12s from landing surreptitiously at night. And so the wartime atmosphere at that point, 1973 to 75, was palpable. I then went on to various assignments and wound up seconded to the White House and working for the good Bush as his national security advisor. Went back with him to Seoul under the presidency of Chun Doo-hwan, who was in many ways a very bad president. And I would like to mention here, as a gesture of respect to a renowned scholar who was gone, Kim Kyung-wan, who was sitting virtually alone in Blue House under Chun Doo-hwan when Harold Brown and I came in December 1980 to try to keep Kim Dae-jung alive, who had been sentenced to death by Chun Doo-hwan for supposedly stirring up political unrest. And we failed, as Chun Doo-hwan saw us as emissaries from the disappearing Carter regime, but the ball was passed to the incoming Reagan regime, and they managed to keep Kim Dae-jung alive and got him released. Kim Kyung-wan was a graduate of my college, Williams, and I urged him to write a book. And he said, "I'm hesitant to do it while certain people are still alive." I said, "You need to do it." And he sort of shook his head and he said, no one will ever know the things I kept Chun Doo-hwan from doing. And I think that's a profound statement, and I think that he was very much involved in getting Chun Doo-hwan to allow the direct election of the president in 1987, which allowed No Tae-yu to come in. Neither Kim Dae-jung nor Kim Young-sam would give way to each other, and so they split the opposition vote, and No Tae-yu came in. He was president when I was ambassador. I think he was an excellent president. I think he's very much underrated by the Koreans. I think they've had three notable presidents, Park Chung-hee, No Tae-yu, and Kim Dae-jung, but No Tae-yu is still not given much recognition. The first thing when I arrived as ambassador in Seoul in '89, I went to the commander of U.S. forces in Korea, and I said, you know, the North Koreans are beginning to move toward construction of nuclear weapons. And he said, yes. I said, we still have nuclear weapons in South Korea. Yes. Why do we have them? Well, we've always had them. I said, well, what are they? And he said, well, there are things like the Honest John surface-to-surface nuclear weapon, which fires a nuclear weapon for 15 miles and then it explodes. How about that? I said, well, what do you think the North Koreans are going to do when we say, don't you build nuclear weapons if we still have them? And he sort of scratched his head. I was very lucky that President had a very good National Security Advisor, Kim Chung-wee. And he said to me, we are going to try to have an atmosphere of complete transparency between your office and the president. And so the first thing I said to him was, I think we need to get nuclear weapons out of South Korea if we have any chance of getting the North to stop building them. And so he took that to President No, and President No came back to me, and we started a series of intensive talks involving the chairman of U.S. Forces Korea. And so a year after I arrived, I was able to send a message to Washington saying, with the full support of President No Tae-yu and General commanding U.S. Forces Korea, we recommend that all nuclear weapons be removed. And a year later, President Bush, in I think a wonderful move, removed all tactical nuclear weapons from all around the world. They still are obviously on aircraft carriers and so forth, but the ground-based weapons were removed, and that started a very fertile period of negotiations between North and South Korea. The key to that, however, was the cancellation for 1 year of the Team Spirit training exercise, which drove North Korea up the wall every year because it was a reenactment of our intervention in 1950 when North Korea attacked South Korea. And we got it stopped in 1992. And that triggered 6 prime ministerial visits and the signing of 2 agreements between North and South Korea, which still are, I think, very central to the potential relationship which needs to evolve between North and South Korea. That was pretty much undone by the Secretary of Defense, Dick Cheney, in one of his many miserable moves, got Team Spirit reinstated for 1993 with the support and encouragement of a number of the generals in South Korea. And I was able to talk to the Kim Chung-wee, the National Security Advisor, on this last year. And I said, I was caught completely by surprise by the reinstatement of Team Spirit. And I have written publicly that it was the biggest mistake we made when I was ambassador. I said, how did that happen? And he said, I thought you knew. And what he meant by that was that the pressure from the South Korean military to reinstate Team Spirit was very large, and it was very much in common with Cheney's warped thinking on how to approach the problem of North Korea. So that triggered a very bad period between North and South Korea. And my successor as ambassador handled the situation very well, I think, by calling up Jimmy Carter, who had an open invitation to go to North Korea. He went, met with Kim Jong-il, and the problem was more or less kicked down the road, at least, and a very, very difficult and dangerous crisis in 1994 was avoided. And I think that Jim Laney, who was ambassador there, deserves a great deal of credit for making that move. The one senior American who I think deserves most credit for dealing effectively with North Korea is Bill Perry, who was Secretary of Defense, and after the North Koreans fired the Taepodong II, which rattled the Japanese cage very strongly, he worked effectively and over a protracted period of time to solve that missile issue, paving the way for the visit to Washington of Jo Myung-rok, the marshal, the second ranking man in the country, who invited President Clinton to go to Pyongyang. And I think that the high point of U.S.-North Korean relations was a lunch given by Al Gore for Jo Myung-rok in the fall of 2000. I was there. I heard words that I've never heard before, and I haven't heard them since, but I continued working on this issue in the hope that we could say that kind of thing to each other again. And it was a message of hope, it was a message of solution, it was a message of reconciliation. So things were looking good as Clinton left office and W came in. Kim Dae-jung had become president, and he invited me to his inauguration, and I had helped sort of keep him alive a couple of times, so he and I were on good terms. And he said, you know, you're running the Korea Society now, and you've done a lot to improve South Korean relations, but you haven't done anything with North Korea. So I want you to plant the Korea Society flag in North Korea. And I took that very seriously and began with Fred Carrier's wonderful assistance. Fred, incidentally, I think has as profound an insight into the North Korean character as anybody in the United States, and I'm very glad that he's here. So we began to work toward establishing some kind of relationship with the North Korean mission to the UN. And 2000, Bill Clinton went out of office really on a high point with the hope that perhaps a visit could eventuate, but in came George W. Bush, and in 2002, in his State of the Union address, he gave his historic Axis of Evil speech, which rotted my socks really as much as anything I ever heard in the Vietnam War. The Axis of Evil, putting North Korea in league with Iran and Iraq, was totally counterproductive and totally irrational. And things came to an absolute screeching halt. Nothing was going on. I tried to start something with Bob Scalapino to lead a group of former ambassadors to North Korea, but that fell through. And so there was an absolute dead period. And so I felt this very strange desire or strong feeling of compunction to write a letter to North Korea, offering myself up and saying, we have definitely things that we need to talk about. And I'd like to come and talk to you about that. This was addressed to Kim Jong-il. And so I finally sat down and wrote such a letter. And Fred Carrier was the only other living being who knew about it. And so I took it to the North Korean mission, and there was a man named Ri Gun there. And he read the letter, and he looked at me, and he said, "Who do you think you are writing a letter like that to my chief?" And I said, "Well, you know who I am." And in evidence of that, I'm going to pass 3 or 4 things around. Here's a North Korean leaflet dropped when I was ambassador by the North Koreans. It shows me plotting the demise of Kim Young-sam with President No Tae-yu. I picked it up on a golf course in 1991. And so please pass it around. I want it back, but anyway, I think you want to get a feeling for it. So anyway, I was challenged by Ri-kun, who do you think you are? And I said, well, I think your president is very, or your marshal or whatever he was called, is highly intelligent. And he said, how do you know he's intelligent? And so I quoted a number of people, in particular Professor Tolaroya, who had gone by train with Kim Jong-il to Moscow. And it was one of the most interesting insights I ever had in Kim Jong-il. And your questions to him, why are you coming in by train? Why aren't you flying? And his answer, well, you don't see much of anything from the air, and I want to see what is happening in the Soviet Union from the ground. And I thought that was a very profound statement. I also had talked to Madeleine Albright, who had had 11 hours of discussion with Kim Jong-il, and she said that I appeared publicly with her at the University of Michigan one time, and she said, Kim Jong-il and I have quite a lot in common. We're about the same height, we both wear high heels, and we both put mousse in our hair. But she also said that he was very, very intelligent. So Lee-gun said, okay, I'll send your letter. And I was interested in this because the North Koreans very clearly knew who I was. A comrade of mine had been captured by the Chinese in 1952 and under torture had given my name, so I'd been denounced out of East Germany in 1958. So there was no doubt who I was, but they still accepted my coming. So I then had this permission to go to North Korea, and I decided I ought to tell the State Department. And I teach a course at Williams on intelligence, and I, at this point, asked my students, why do you think I didn't tell the State Department before writing the letter? And they usually get the answer correct, which is if you told them that you were going to write the letter, they would say, no way should you do it. So I had no idea what the State Department would feel about the fact that I had written a letter and had been invited, and actually they were very pleased and sent with me a Korean-speaking Foreign Service officer, a young woman who made my life in North Korea much easier than it would have been otherwise. And my first meeting in North Korea was with Kim Gae-kwon, who most of you know. And he asked me 3 questions, which I thought were very, very good. One is, why is George W. Bush so different from his father? Which I thought was a very important question. And I said, well, America's a large country, and Father Bush was raised in New England, and his son was raised in Texas, and that makes a great deal of difference. He said, well, how do you function as a country when you elect presidents who have nothing in common with their predecessors? And I said, well, that's the way democracy works. If we don't like what one president does, we elect somebody else who does things differently. And he said, well, that may work for you all, but it makes it very difficult for us to keep up with you. And then he said, why don't you understand us better? And I said, well, I consider you to be the longest running failure in the history of American intelligence. And I can testify to that because I chased you around ineffectively for a couple of decades. And I said you were very difficult to recruit. We could recruit everybody else, but it was very difficult to recruit all of you. And so he surprised me by saying, are you wearing your Op Center hat when you give that answer? And Op Center was a miserable paperback novel written by Tom Clancy, co-authored by a guy named Steve Pachenik, who knew me. And the hero of the book was named Gregory Donald. And I was formerly chief of station in Seoul and then ambassador to Seoul. So there was a certain resemblance, and I took a good deal of kidding from my still covert friends around the country. And so I said, well, I'm amazed that you know about that lousy book. And Kim Gae-kwon made a wonderful response. He said, don't assume that we know as little about you as you know about us. And I've never forgotten that. I think that's a brilliant insight into where we are and why we are where we are. And so I said, well, would you like to know my wife's reaction to the book? I said, I haven't read it, but she has. And he said, yes. And I said, well, she didn't really mind that I died a heroic death at the end of the book, but she was furious that I'd had a North Korean mistress. And so they all got a kick out of that. And they have the same sense of humor that the South Koreans have. I raised the issue of the Pueblo in that visit, and they were very interested in it, and I got a note from Kim Gae-gwan saying, come back, we're going to do what you suggest, which was return the Pueblo. And I gave notice of that to the American establishment, the Navy. It was a terrible embarrassment for the U.S. Navy from start to finish. They had sort of put the Pueblo out where there was no way it could have been aided under attack, and they were embarrassed by it. I remember a four-star admiral, when I told him that the North Koreans were considering returning, he said, oh, that goddamn thing ought to have been sunk at the time. And the crew of the Pueblo is very loyal to the ship, and they have very strong feelings about how they were more or less abandoned by the U.S. Navy. So Fred Carrier and Don Oberdorfer and I went back in November, and Kim Gae-gwan said, well, you've now accused us of a second approach toward nuclear weapons involving highly enriched uranium, and so that has knocked the Pueblo option off the table. And but he said, I still wanted you to come. So we pressed very hard for some signal from the North Koreans that they still wanted communication directly with the United States, and I particularly called attention to the fact that W. Bush, at his visit to the DMZ, had said something conciliatory to North Korea about our not having any intention of attacking them. And so we pressed very, very hard. I met with Kang Suk-ju, and so about 2 hours before we left, I received from him this, which is a Korean statement of what they were willing to do if we began to react in a more positive way to them. They said, take it to the White House, please don't tell anyone else about it. And so that's what I did. And so Oberdorfer and I presented ourselves to the White House. I had worked there for 10 years. I was invited in by Steve Hadley, who was Condoleezza Rice's #2 at the NSC. We had this translated, obviously, and he read it, handed it back. He said, no, we won't talk to them. That would be rewarding bad behavior. He checked with no one. He read it once, handed it back. I was in and out of the White House in 20 minutes. I wrote a full report of how I'd gotten the report, who had given it to me. No reaction, as there has been no reaction officially for any of the trips that I have made to North Korea. So here's the message in Korean that I handed to Hadley, and which he immediately rejected. Over the next 3 or 4 years, I went back to North Korea 2 or 3 times, once with Ted Turner, who was interested in setting up some kind of a DMZ special economic zone, and in 2008, we had pushed very hard to get the New York Philharmonic to visit North Korea, and so one of the high points for me was going to the inauguration of Lee Myung-bak, and then the next day being allowed to cross the DMZ with Bill Perry, and we drove through the snow up to Pyongyang, had a meeting with Kim Gae-gwan, and went to the marvelous concert given by the New York Philharmonic, where Lauren Mazel, who recently has died, did a magnificent job. He had learned to speak some Korean. He closed with Arirang, and it was just a magnificent success, followed by master's lessons the next day, which were surprises to both the Koreans and the Americans. The Americans were amazed at how good the North Koreans were musically, and the North Korean young musicians were amazed that these world-class musicians would take time to give them lessons. So that was in early 2008. And I was still running the Korea Society. And then in March of 2010 came the sinking of the Chonan, which I was in Korea a few days after that happened, and 46 sailors drowned. And there was not an immediate accusation of who had done it, but it was very clear that there was a build-up to an accusation of the North Koreans for having sunk the ship, and that later was made formal. And I was very interested in the Russian reaction to the sinking. They'd been invited to send a delegation to attend the investigation of the sinking. The Russians are expert in the matter of submarines and submarine warfare. They noticed a fishnet wrapped around the propeller shaft of the Chonan. They noticed dents in the hull, which indicated that the ship had run aground. And they noticed that the pattern of the explosion was much more similar to that caused by a mine than a torpedo. And when they began to press questions along that line, they ran into a stone wall and returned to Moscow and have never commented publicly. I knew through Russian friends what their thinking was, and so wrote an op-ed in the New York Times I think in the 1st of September 2010, in which I said, I don't think the North Koreans sank the Chonan. And that has made me the skunk at the garden party in South Korea ever since. And it still resonates because the unsolved issue of the Chonan is a real detriment to the establishment of better relations between North and South Korea. But be that as it may, I have continued to try to reach out to the North Koreans, and early this year I felt again the compunction to write a letter to North Korea. And so I wrote this time to Kim Jong-un and said, I'd like to come back to North Korea. I haven't been there for about 6 years. I have an American war hero who would like to personally make peace with one of the men he fought against in North Korea, and we would like to learn more from you about what your economic planning is for North Korea. And again, I was immediately invited to return, and so I've been since elected chairman of the Pacific Century Institute, so Spencer Kim, who's the founder of that institute, Pete McCloskey, the war hero, and Lynn Turk, a senior retired Foreign Service member, and I went to North Korea in February. And McCloskey's experience was very interesting. He's my age, and a film was made about him by Paul Newman called Leading from the Front. And Newman said, McCloskey has led more bayonet charges than anybody since the Civil War. And he had received the Navy Cross, the Silver Star, two Purple Hearts. And his prevailing nightmare was charging up a hill with his bayonet fixed through a torrent of hand grenades being tossed down the hill at him. And he survived through that and came to the top of a trench where there were 5 or 6 young Koreans who had been rolling the hand grenades down at him. They looked up at him utterly terrified, and he killed them all. And he's been haunted by that ever since. So the North Koreans had taken this seriously, and they had located a retired North Korean general who was a docent at their new museum on the Korean War. And so Pete and the general met twice, and on their second meeting, Pete got through to him when he said, General, how many times were you wounded? And the general said 3 times. And he said to Pete, how many times were you wounded? And he said, only twice. And then Pete said, well, what was your weapon? And he said, a heavy machine gun. How old were you? I was 17. Pete was 21. And so at that point, they literally embraced and said, we must keep that from ever happening to our children or our grandchildren. And 2 or 3 months later, I had an email from Pete saying, the therapy of that trip has been extraordinary. My nightmares from about the war have ceased. And the North Koreans are interested to have a larger group of veterans return, and I'm hoping to bring something like that about. But probably more importantly, in the larger scheme of things, we heard from them about what their economic planning goals are. They've divided North Korea into 13 zones. They want to attract foreign investment. They want to improve the English of both their scientists and their economists. They want to learn more about tax rates, about deferred taxing incentives. And it's all of the ABCs of economics of any modern country that's trying to attract foreign investment. And they say, frankly, we don't know how to do it. No holds barred on that issue. And so PCI has moved to try to do more of that. And I know Fred Carrier will get into specifics about what we have done to try to answer that call on their part in the next months. So the trip was a success. Shortly after we came back, the UN issued its report on human rights violations, headed by an Australian named Kirby. And I was invited by the Council on Foreign Relations to attend the meeting of the CFR last April, where Kirby made this report public to the Council on Foreign Relations. Kirby's a very nice guy, not a polemical person at all, and he gave an objective report, and I was the commentator, and I said, well, this is a call to action, Mr. Kirby. I said, it's a call to action to try to overthrow the North Korean regime. That's not going to happen. I say it's a call to action to get the North Koreans to respond and begin to deal with the issues raised by your report. And so I sent a report to the North Koreans through Ambassador Kang, saying you have got to come to grips with the ramifications of this report, and I know it will be very difficult for you to do. And so I'm very glad to see that the North Koreans have started to respond, and on Monday I will introduce at the Council on Foreign Relations Ambassador Jang Il-hun, ambassador to the permanent mission of the DPRK Korea to the UN. And the invitation says, please join Ambassador Jang as he discusses human rights in North Korea on the record. And I have said to everybody I can, this is going to be a tough session for him. Nothing he will be able to say is going to satisfy the demonizers. They will say it's a cover-up, it's inadequate, they're not facing up to what they have done, all of which is true in a way, but he is going to say, in essence, we are a country in transition. And that is an important word, because it's the start of a process. And so after many years of sort of frustration, I have sort of reached the point where I think there may be some hope for the establishment of fuller and more meaningful dialogue between North Korea and the outside world on the issue of human rights. The theme of this remark, of these remarks, are in this book, which I have just written. There's a chapter called The Dangers of Demonization. We have a tendency, a national tendency, when we are dealing with people we neither like nor understand, of filling our gaps of ignorance with prejudice. We did it with Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam and fought a war which I was involved in for 4 years that we never should have fought. We actually demonized Saddam Hussein by saying he was in bed with Al-Qaeda and he had nuclear weapons, neither of which was true. So we need to sort of break this cycle of demonization, which we now have attached quite fully to Kim Jong-un. And as soon as he disappeared, the right-wing press was saying, oh, he's been overthrown, and there's a coup, and so forth, none of which was true. So that's more or less where I am at this point. I am, again, just absolutely delighted to be here. This is a world-class event at a world-class university. I look forward to hearing what all of you have to say. And Hazel and I are going to be a two-man jury. I just let you know this. And we'll give the copy of this book to the person who makes the most provocative statement in the conference. So thank you very much for your attention.